Hello, I welcome you to this section. Today, we would be looking at an interesting section in research, very, very important in research methodology known as research designs. So, in this lecture, we're only going to focus our discussions today on epidemiological study designs. Epidemiological study design. That is the study designs that are relevant in our own area of specialty as community health practitioners, public health practitioners. Okay, so that is what we are going to be looking at briefly. And you know that epidemiology is the branch of medical sciences that deals with the study of the distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in a specified population and the application of this study to control health problems. Okay, so in a simpler terms, epidemiology focuses on understanding the pattern and causes of diseases and health outcomes. So one of the main ways of understanding the pattern, causes, and determinants of this is through research. Okay, history research, we're able to understand how things happen and the relationship that's existing is through research. So in our own specialty, we look at or we focus our own on epidemiological research designs. Okay, so epidemiological research designs is categorized, as you can see on your screen. We have the non-experimental, or you call it the observational, and the experimental, or you call it interventional studies or study design. So they are grouped into a major two, the non-experimental, or you call it observational study, or the experimental, you call it interventional studies, okay? Now, what is research design? A research design refers to the overall plan or strategy that a researcher uses to investigate a particular research problem. It outlines the structure and methods. It outlines the structure and methods which the researcher have or will employ in carrying out his or her research. So a well-designed research study has the following components. It will have the objective, hypothesis, study population, data collection, data analysis, and ethical clearance. So in a research design, it is a detailed statement or detailed process or procedure how that researcher wants to investigate the problem, answer the research questions, test the hypothesis, and be able to come up with a conclusion. So that is what a research design is all about. First and foremost, we are going to take these research designs. We're going to start with non-experimental, also known as observational study design. Under these observational study designs, we have the ones that focus on population. That is, the unit of analysis for this design is population, whereas the other one is each unit of analysis focuses on individuals. But remember, it is under observational study. And under observational studies, you only what? Observe. You only what? You observe. You don't manipulate. You don't manipulate variables. Rather, you observe and report what you have observed or what you saw during the observational period. Okay? Whereas in experimental, you are going to manipulate. There will be a control group and there will be an interventional group where you administer a particular treatment and see the outcome. So that's just the two differences between observational study design and interventional or experimental study design. In observational study design, you are only observing how the phenomena is going on. Whereas in the experimental, you are going to administer treatment. You're going to manipulate a particular variable, known as the independent variable, while you see what happens in the dependent variable. So that is the two major big categories. Then under observational studies, where I said your duty is just to observe how the phenomena is occurring. We have another two broad categories. The population base, that is the unit of analysis. Like the study is based on population, it's not studying an individual. Whereas this one, the other arm is individual based, that is studying what? Individuals, but as a unit of analysis. Whereas this one talks about population as a unit of analysis. Under this population base, we have the descriptive. From the word descriptive, you are only going to describe what you saw. You are only going to describe what you saw. An example is health surveys. Health surveys. When you talk about health surveys, it's a type of research design that you just go to the, let's say, National Demographic Health Survey. You go and conduct the survey, go into that particular area, take the data at population level. You go to community of Mbitolu, you are assessing the malaria reports and all of that at that population level. Whatever you saw on the field, you are going to report it that way. That is descriptive observational studies. Okay, that is under non-experimental or observational study. So you have the descriptive under that population base. Then we also have the analytic population-based observational studies. Under this particular design, you are going to compare two variables to see if there is a relationship existing between the two. Take note, in the other one, descriptive angle part of it, you are only going to field, you are reporting what you saw. But in analytical, you are going to compare to see if there is a relationship between the two variables of interest. In analytical, we are not doing experiments. We are not experimenting because there's no control group and there's no manipulation. But in experimental, there is a control group and there's experiments. You are going to carry out an experiment. But because analytical ecological study is under observational study, you are only going to observe. But however, you are observing the relationship or in the interaction between two variables of interest. Let's say pollution and respiratory tract infection. And this ecological study design talks about ecosystem, okay? It talks about ecosystem. What do we mean by ecosystem? Ecological study design is ecological research design that try to establish a relationship between two or more variables in the ecosystem. So this ecological study, some school of thought also call it correlation, tries to, its main area is to on the ecosystem, the ecology, the environment. That's what the research is just about environment, okay? Environment and how it interacts with human health and human well-being, okay? But it involves analytical, okay? Whereby whenever you hear the word analytical, it actually means trying to see if there's a relationship between two, to analyze if there's a relationship existing between these two variables of what interest. Ecological study design try to study the interaction between organisms and the environment. So researchers involved in ecological study uses ecological study design to establish a correlation between two variables of what? Interest. They try to look at factors such as temperature, precipitation, species diversity, habits, characteristics, and all of that, so that they can understand how the ecosystem is affecting or functioning. Okay? Ecological study design is a type of observational study, like I've said. They are focused on analyzing the relationship between environmental factors and health outcome at population level. Okay? So that is what ecological study design is used for. We use it to analyze relationship between environmental factors and human health. Okay, so that is another observational study design, which its unit of analysis is on the population. Okay, we've been able to look at observation, we've been able to look at experimental and non-experimental, where I said in non-experimental, you are not manipulating any variable and you are not having any control group. You are not trying to influence one variable to see the outcome on the other. Whereas the experimental is the reverse of it, where you are going to have a control variable, right? Where you're going to have a control group, and where you are going to manipulate, and where you're going to randomize. Then we went further to discuss on observational studies, where we said there are of two. The ones that focus on population as its unit of analysis, under which we looked at descriptive versus. And I told you that when you hear the word descriptive, it's all about you going to the field and taking data and reporting what you saw. Now, we went further to discuss the analytical arm of it, and where we look at correlation or ecological studies, where we talk about studies that are concerned with environment and how it interacts with organisms and humans and how it impacts on it. And I gave you an example. You can carry out a study on how environmental pollution affects the health of people in Imo State. So in this type of research or study design, you are going to take you're going to first of all set your research questions. Okay, to one of the research questions you can say is to study the impact of air pollution on respiratory health in urban areas in Imo State. Then you go to field, then you collect data on air pollution level, and also collect data on outcome, which is respiratory health. You want to check if there's a relationship between air pollution and people coming down with respiratory tract infection. Okay, then you collect data. Then when you collect data, you go into what's known as pattern analysis. You can use geographic information system to map out the distribution of air pollution levels and respiratory health outcomes across different local governments in Imo State. You might, by the time you go to that map, you see area marked with red, and maybe that area marked with red is the place that has the highest level of high air pollution and possibility of high respiratory tract infection. So by the time you take data and analyze, you are trying to see if this high pollution at Mbitolu is related to the high incidence of residents of Mbitolu coming down with a respiratory tract infection. So now at that point, you are doing what? You are analyzing. You are doing analysis. You are trying to see if there's a relationship existing with this and with this. But here, you are not manipulating. Rather, you are still what? Observing. The only thing that you are trying to compare if there is a relationship existing between these two. So that is for population-based observational studies, or also known as analytical ecological study. Okay, then now let's move down to individual-based. That is the one that uses individual as units of analysis. Under this unit of we also have the descriptive again, which I've explained only to describe, and also we have the analytic. Okay, now let's look at descriptive. Remember, it's just to describe. One of the designs under descriptive is case reports. Case report. Case report. A case report is made for a particular person who has a disease or a particular health issue you are reporting. So you're the one reporting the person based on the person's demographic characteristics, the person's age, height, the signs and symptoms the person presented, and all of that. All these are all involved in case report design. So it's mainly used in medical science and also in public health. So this type of research design focuses on single individual. It provides a comprehensive account of the patient's condition, treatment, and outcome. Okay? So one of the purposes is for us to document unusual or noteworthy cases in order to contribute medical knowledge or guide future research or clinical practice. So under the case report, you are just reporting a particular person to see if what type of disease is this that is presenting for the first time or presenting in a different form. So you're only observing this patient and reporting the characteristics, the time of admission, the signs and symptoms presented, the clinical manifestation, and everything about this case report. That is another form of observational study under individual based. Okay. The another one is case series. Case series is similar to case report, but the only difference that it is more than one. Okay. So case series, this kind of study design is based on reports of a series of cases of a specific conditions or a series of treated cases. Like you have, maybe you come to a particular event and you have 20 cases of measles. That is a case what? Series, okay? So under the same, you're going to provide the data on the characteristics, the treatment they have received, and the outcome of the cases, okay? The purpose is to provide preliminary evidence, describe the pattern or trend, and also we can from there generate hypothesis for further what? Research. Okay, so under that series, it gives us a guide. We are going to look at the disease, what you have been presenting, what are the clinical signs and symptoms, the treatment options, what has been done. So, and from there, we can know whether there's an outbreak in that area. So a case series is also a descriptive observational study design. Another one is case report, but not here. We omitted it, sorry. A case study is an in-depth analysis of a single individual, group, or event or phenomenon. It involves detailed explanation and interpretation of data to understand complex issues or behavior. So in case study, we are going deep to investigate about that case, okay? It might be multidisciplinary, a lot of healthcare workers, a lot of specialties will be involved. The essence is to gain understanding into how complex that phenomenon is, and also provide detailed description, analyze specific situation, and develop theoretical framework that will be used. Okay, so that is essence of using case study design. So that will be all for descriptive survey design under individual base, under observational study. Okay, under observational study. Then the next is analytical. Remember, we are still under observational study, and we have divided it into population-based and individual-based. Under population-based, we've looked at the health surveys, and we've looked at analytical, descriptive, and analytical. Under analytical, we looked at ecological study. Then we are now under individual-based, where we have looked at descriptive, and we have been able to look at case reports, case series, and case study, which are designs used for individuals. Now we're going to analytical, where we have explained earlier that is to see if there's a relationship existing between two variables. You are trying to analyze, but you are not experimenting. Under that analytical study design, we have the cross-sectional study design. Cross-sectional study design. This design is just a type of a research design that is frequently used, whereby a researcher goes into the field. Whoever he or she saw in the field, he collects data and go. It's like a snapshot. like a snapshot. Let's say now there are 5 of you, or that in a class of 20, and a photographer wants to take a photo. Now, immediately the photographer is ready and says cheese and takes that snapshot. Whatever he captures, that is it. Okay, and it's only once. It helps us to identify prevalence of condition at that particular point in time. That's why it's also called a prevalence study. The existence at that particular point in time. So that is what cross-sectional study design is all about. So this design entails the collection of data, as the term implies, a cross-section of the population, which may comprise the whole population or a sample. Okay, it does not test hypothesis, and it does not talk about association. That is in a for because under this cross-sectional study design, we also have cross-sectional study design under descriptive, but not included here. We have this cross-sectional study design under descriptive. But what I want you to understand is that cross-sectional study design is a snapshot that only captures once, and it shows the prevalence. Then this cross-sectional study design is of two. The one that is under descriptive and the one that is under analytical. But this one we are talking now is under analytical, because this cross-sectional design will also what? Analyze. This will also what? Analyze two sets of variables. Okay? Two sets of variables. Like I was explaining, cross-sectional study design is a snapshot as a one-time capture, okay? It has two. One, under descriptive, which talks about just going to the field, collect the data, and describe it or say what you saw on the field. See, if you want to carry out a research that you just want to go to the field, let's say you want to take the attitude and the knowledge and attitude of pregnant women towards exclusive breastfeeding. If you want to do such research, and under your research, under your objective, there's nothing like to establish the relationship between knowledge and exclusive breastfeeding. But you just to determine the knowledge, to determine the attitude, to determine the breastfeeding pattern. You are only determining, you're only trying to determine. You are going to use cross-sectional study design. Okay, descriptive cross-sectional study design. That is what you are going to use. Descriptive cross-sectional study design. That's what you are going to use. Descriptive cross-sectional design. Now, when you go to the field, you administer your questionnaire, you collect data from the respondent. Maybe at the end of collection of data, you find out that they have poor knowledge, and they have poor breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding behavior. That is what you saw. Then that's the way you are going to report it. That's what descriptive is all about. Then on the other hand, maybe in that your research, you have an objective to establish a relationship between knowledge of women towards exclusive breastfeeding and exclusive breastfeeding. That is now you want to analyze between two variables, knowledge and exclusive breastfeeding. At that point, you are going to use analytical cross-sectional study design, because you are going to establish a relationship. Now, when you have gone to the field and collected data on their knowledge, and you find that their knowledge is low, and then you also collect data on breastfeeding exclusively, and you find out that it's low, you are going to use chi-square to do analysis to see if there is a relationship why their knowledge is low and their breastfeeding exclusively is also low. You now, from your analysis, you would not say, there is a relationship, or there's no relationship. existing between two, that it may have occurred by chances. No. So that is what cross-sectional study design. The key thing that cross-sectional study design is a design that just collects an information once. Okay, it collects information once from the study participants. It doesn't go twice. Okay, so that is what cross-sectional study design is all about. So in a nutshell, what we have been able to explain on analytical cross-sectional study design, that is of two types, descriptive and analytical. And we've been able to say that descriptive, go to the field, collect data, and describe what you saw. Then under analytical, the investigator measures exposure and disease simultaneously. Sorry. So under this analytical cross-sectional study design, the researcher will find out the prevalence and at the same time try to relate, analyze data from population in order to investigate relationship between the two variables of interest. So this type of study aims to determine the prevalence of a particular condition or characteristics and also explore potential association between variables. So I believe I've given enough explanation on cross-sectional study design, both the descriptive and analytical. Then the next is case control. Case control. Case control. Case control is another analytical, and I believe you'll be expecting to talk about trying to analyze between two variables. That's what it's all about. But it's under analytical. Then now we say case controls. This is the simplest and most commonly used analytical strategy in epidemiology. It involves the case control study. It is designed primarily to establish the causes of a disease by investigating association between exposure to a risk factor and the occurrence of a disease. The design is relatively simple, except that it is backward-looking, like it is retrospective. It tries to explore exposures that have happened in the past among the participants. And it tries to look at the risk factors, which is something that happened or began in the past. For example, smoking or previous infection or medication. So under case control studies, it involves the investigator trying to determine if a greater proportion of cases than controls have a history of exposure. That's just what it's all about. What I'm trying to explain is this, that the researcher is interested to determine the proportion of cases than controls that give a history of exposure or have records or indication of exposure in the past. Okay? And therefore, the factor or attributes can be suspected of being a causal factor. What we're trying to explain in case control, like the word suggests case control, there are two groups. We are going to get two groups of participants. One is a group who has the condition and a group who do not have the condition. So the group that has the condition is known as the case, whereas the group that don't have the condition is known as control. You are going to have them 50-50. You separate them. Now, let's use oral cancer as an example. Now, the case will be patients who have oral cancer, and whereas patients who do not have this oral cancer is known as control. So you get them 50-50 in your study. Now, under that 50-50, under that 50-50 case and 50 control, in the cases, you are going to have persons who in the past or even currently choose tobacco? Because we are trying to establish a relationship. If tobacco causes oral cancer, that is what we use this. That is why we used this study design, case control. We want to establish if there's a relationship between case and control. Okay. Now we are employed this design. Now we are going to have a cases and controls. Under the case and control, you're not manipulating, you're only going to observe. In that case, we got 50 men or women who has oral cancer. And in their histories, like in the past, among them, there are persons who chew tobacco, and among them, and also among their cases, there are some who do not chew tobacco. So you're going to employ their histories of exposure. That's what case control tried to establish. Then, under control, which are the group who do not have oral cancer, but under them, we are also going to have those who still chew tobacco, but do not have oral cancer, and also going to have those who do not chew tobacco, and they do not have oral cancer. By the time we go into studies and try to look at their histories, when we try to look at their histories, and after our analysis, we come to understand that greater proportion of the cases, that is, greater proportion of these cases have a higher history of chewing tobacco, more than the control. Then we can now say that, yes, there is a relationship existing between chewing tobacco and coming down with oral cancer. What we're trying to explain is this: in a case control study, we're going to have a two group. The first group will be cases, the other group will be control. Under that cases, you are going to take people from the same environment, and in their histories, some who have the case, by the time you begin to do your investigation, they may have been chewing tobacco, and some too may not be choosing, may not have engaged or may not have consumed tobacco. Then in the controls too, because we're going to take them from some environments. Let's say in a particular environment where they grow a lot of tobacco, that tobacco is a prevalent something there in that particular, let's say in community A, that people consume tobacco there, but you want to see if there's a relationship between tobacco, chewing of tobacco, and coming down with oral cancer. You go there, you collect 50 cases of people who have oral cancer, and also collect 50 persons who do not have oral cancer. By the time you do retrospective study, try to study their histories. Then, at the end of the investigation, you find out that inside that 50 persons who have oral cancer, that 40 of them chewed or had chewed tobacco after reviewing their history. Then only 10 that did not chew tobacco, but yet they come down with oral cancer. Then you go back to the case controls. You find out that 20 were currently chewing tobacco, or 30 were currently chewing tobacco, and 20 were not chewing tobacco, but they have not come down with oral cancer. You can confidently say that there is a relationship between chewing tobacco and oral cancer because of the studies you've carried out. So that's what that statement was saying, that in other words, if a greater proportion of cases than controls give a history of exposure or have records or indication of exposure in the past, therefore the factor can be suspected of being a causal factor. So that is what case control is all about, and it's an analytical observational study design. The next is cohort studies. Cohort studies. Cohort study is a type of observational study that follows a group of individuals over a long period to observe and analyze how certain factors or exposures affect their health. So that is what cohort study is all about. Cohort study can be prospective or retrospective. So under cohort study, you go into the population, also using cancer as an example, oral cancer as an example. You go into a particular population. You go into a particular population, let's say community B, that do not have oral cancer in them. You select a sample. Okay. Now you separate them into two. Some will be exposed to chewing tobacco, some will not be exposed. Okay. So now, at the end of that observation, and those you now observe to see those that will develop oral cancer among those who chew that tobacco and those who do not develop oral cancer. Then you also go to the other group, cohorts. That's why I call it cohorts. Among other groups that were not exposed to tobacco. Then you now observe how many that came down with the oral disease and how many that do not come down with the disease. That is cohort studies. So we are going to have two groups. Okay, the group that will be exposed to the risk and the other group that will not be exposed to the risk. Then after your exposure, you observe among those exposed to the risk, how many came down and how many did not come down. Among those not exposed to the risk, how many came down with their disease condition and how many did not come down with disease condition. That is cohort studies. So it is a common strategy, okay? And it's usually start with a population, okay, that's free of that condition, okay? Then you will have the group that's exposed, that's known as the exposed group, and you're going to have the group that is the other group that is not exposed, okay? The groups would start the study at the same time, okay? And then they are observed over a specified period to find out the risk each group has to developing the condition of interest. So that is all about cohort studies. The only thing that about case controls is that you are looking at the past histories of these people, and you already have seen persons who have the condition, and you have also brought persons who do not have the condition. You try to look at their history to establish if there's a relationship. Then in cohort studies, you are entirely bringing two different persons, two different groups, and the groups, none of them were exposed, none of them have the condition at that point. Then you'll not expose them one group and you'll not expose the other group, so that you can establish if exposure to this group to a risk will make them come down with this condition or not. From there, you can reliably say that there is a relationship existing between this risk factor and development of this condition. The next is, I believe this, we've been able to look at the analytical designs under individual base, and we are through with observational study designs. Now let's look at experimental or interventional studies. Under experimental interventional studies, we have randomized and non-randomized designs. The only thing about this design is that in randomized design, probability is applied. That is, the probability of being selected is not known. Whereas under non-randomized, there is no randomization. Okay? And that makes it quasi-experimental. Okay? That makes it quasi-experimental. Like all the conditions with experimentation are not completely met in non-randomized. Okay? So under that non-randomized, we have control trials. And we also have field trials, community trials under non-randomized. Then we have clinical trials under randomized. We said that experimental study design is a research method used to investigate cause and effect relationship between variables. In an experimental study, researchers manipulate one or more independent variables to observe the effect on a dependent variable while controlling for other factors that could influence the outcome. So for an experimental studies, there's random assignment. That is, the chances of being selected into the experimental group is not known. And the chances of not being selected into the control group is not known. So that is random. So participants are randomly assigned to different groups, okay, both the experimental group and the control group, to ensure that each group is representative of the population being studied. And this will help to minimize bias and ensure that any differences observed are due to manipulation of the independent variable. Then in an experimental design, there is control group. This is a group that does not receive or who does not receive the experimental treatment or intervention. And it serves as a baseline for comparison with the experimental group, okay? And this is the highest level of research. And whatever that comes out from experimentation is accepted more than any other design. So we have community interventions under experimental design. And we also have the randomized clinical trials. Randomized clinical trials. Under the community intervention trials, they are usually carried out in hospitals and usually directed with specific health conditions. For example, trying to test a vaccine in a community. Okay, vaccinating one group and not vaccinating one group, so that to take the effect of that vaccine. So these are example of a randomized control trials. Then with other non-randomized control trials, we've been able to talk about field experiments and all of that. So in a non-randomized control trials, it's a type of study where participants are randomly assigned to different groups. Instead, in a non-randomized control trials, the type of study design where participants are not randomly assigned to different groups. Instead, the allocation of participants to different groups is based on factors such as patient preferences, those who are available, and other specific criteria set by the researcher. Okay, that's just what happens in non-randomized control trials. Okay, take for example a study on the effectiveness of a new therapy for managing chronic pain in elderly patients. Researchers recruit 100 elderly patients with chronic pain who visit a particular clinic. Then patients are divided into two groups based on their preferences, rather being randomized. Okay, so now some group will choose to be the group that the new therapy will be applied, and others will be in the other group, and they are 50-50. So the 50 receive the new therapy for managing chronic pain, and 50 receive the other treatment that have been existing. At the end of the research or the study, researcher will now collect data on pain levels, quality of life, and even any adverse effects experienced by participants in the both groups. Statistical analysis will now be carried out to compare the outcome between the two groups. If the new therapy shows significant improvement in pain management compared to the standard treatment group, researchers may conclude that the new therapy is effective. But remember, since participants are not randomly assigned to group, there may be bias or confounding variables. So in a nutshell, that's just the difference between non-randomized and randomized. The randomized design, there's the probability of being selected or not being selected is unknown. But in non-randomized, the probability of being selected is known, and the probability of not being selected in the control group or in the experimentation group is known, and is done by preferences. And I've given an example. So this is, or today's study, we're able to look at all the research designs that we employ in epidemiological studies or community health research. Thank you.